So I'm here with a very old friend of mine, Neil Grantham. I
Not
don't
that
mean
old.
he's that old. Neil and I have worked together for many, 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 many years. Most of the time, we just end up talking about rugby and sport, and the work takes second place. But Neil runs a market research business, and market research is always one of the first elements of any marketing work we do with our clients. So I thought I'd take the chance to pick Neil's brains while I'm over here, and get some expert input onto research. So Neil, thank you for making me a half decent cup of tea.
Thank you. Yorkshire tea.
Yeah, well, absolutely. So as I said, market research is one of the first things I do. But why is it important that a business understands their competitors as well as their prospective audience and prospective customers?
Well, I mean, businesses need to understand everything. If there are gaps in their knowledge, that's where mistakes can be made. So, if you're trying to plan a new product launch or a new branding or change your strategy, and you only think about one aspect, do we like it? What do our main customers think? You're going to miss a lot of opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
You look at the competitors, first of all, to see what they're doing. They might not be doing things right or better, but there may be something really interesting that you can learn from their mistakes. Or if someone's driving forward and growing, how are they doing it? Are they changing the way that this sector operates?
Mm-hmm.
There's lots of things you can learn just by analysing the competitor's strategy, maybe analysing what your customers think of the competitors. Why are they using you versus the competitors? Let's just see what the differences are.
Mm-hmm.
So there's lots of things you can learn just by looking at the market itself. And also to avoid the competitors is also avoiding the market. You might be a very specific segment in a large marketplace, but the competitors might be in much larger spaces
Mm-hmm.
that you could move into. So always look at them as your benchmark. Look at what you're doing yourself,
Yeah.
and look at your own customers and the prospects, the competitors' users and the prospects. But even then, you won't. That's not everybody. There are all the stakeholders, the suppliers to the sector, the industry you're in. So, there are lots of different audiences and lots of different things you need to look at, depending on what your objective is. Whether you're launching a new product, whether you're just trying to see what a problem is in the business. We've got a decision to make. How do we solve this problem? So,
because for me, I guess one of the biggest challenges I've always had with many clients, not all, but many, is they talk about, this is what we want to say, this is what we do.
Yeah.
And it's all about me, we. When actually it's nothing to do with them. It's about what do your customers want.
Yeah.
And that's, to me, is the fundamental. What do your existing customers and potential customers want in terms of products or services, in terms of the messaging, but also in terms of how they want to hear the information.
Yeah.
And too many businesses out there, in my mind, because they don't have the research, it then becomes about me.
Yeah.
And even down to the color of your brand. You talked about branding. The color of your brand.
Yeah.
You don't necessarily want to have a black brand just because you like black, because it can have so many different connotations. But you don't know until you speak to your customers.
No, exactly.
So, how then? If I'm the business owner and I've come to Neil and I've said, look, Neil, can WDG go out and understand the marketplace? How would I then use that information as part of my planning, as part of my business planning, let alone my marketing planning?
Well, I mean, it really depends how far you are up the learning curve. I'm just going back to your personal opinion way of sort of decision making and marketing. the owners of a business may not be the target market for that product, that brand. So for a start, they need to understand what the target market wants.
Yeah.
So actually sort of making decisions, and I'm not being ageist, but a 55-year-old sort of owner of a business who's selling, I don't know, a teenage energy drink or fashion item or something like that, will have an idea. Their kids might like certain things, certain peer groups that they're connected to might know, but are they the same as their target market that they're talking to? So that's the difference. The huge gap between personal knowledge and what's out there in the world is often quite big. Obviously, if someone's has launched a product that they've been passionate about and they've created it and they know what it stands for and how it works, that's slightly different because they're driving it the way they want to move it. But if they've got a generic product or a product which is aimed at someone else, not them, then that's where they need to find out what the people who it's aimed at really think.
Yeah.
So that's why when you're building your business plan up, you need to understand, first of all, who your primary target audience is and your secondary audiences are. When you're planning, obviously, you will look at a time period. How far do we want to go? How big do we want to grow? Where are we going to sell? Are we just going to stay in the UK? Or are we going to be global, etc.? So all of that needs to be in the planning. And all of that brings up different questions. Where are we going to sell? Well, what does each type of outlet, or whether it be sort of retail or online, what do they need? What information do they need? And what information can they give us in terms of helping us to design? So research, the program of research that you use really depends on where you are in up the learning curve, how much you already know as fact and what's opinion, and what gaps in information you need to fill in. And the research is used to fill in the gaps, provide help to people to feel confident that their decision making is founded on sort of robust sort of research. And it just reduces the risk. That's basically what research is.
So somebody came up with a great analogy with me the other day and said, if you were making skateboards, and after the Olympics, skateboarding's got a higher profile, you probably wouldn't look to be using emails or LinkedIn as your primary sales channels. You would be looking at TikTok, you'd be looking at Instagram to create memory associations with your target audience, who will probably be teenagers, and who will be on LinkedIn and on Instagram and TikTok far more than any parents would ever want them to be. But the parents aren't the audience.
No.
Likewise, if you're selling business services, you probably won't be looking at using TikTok, for example. You'll be looking at sponsorship of events. You'll be looking at going out to events where businesses are there. So it's a very good point. But should you be doing the research? I mean, once you've done your planning, you've got your marketing team have put a great marketing strategy together, and you've all bought into it. You've understood the marketplace. That's fantastic. Great. Isn't that just a tick in the box? Job done. Thank you very much. Let's go off and do the marketing.
Yeah. It is if it's perfect and it's all been well thought out and checked out. So, I mean, classically, research would be the first thing that you would do. So before you've created the marketing strategy, before you've put the product together, the packaging together, the branding, the messaging, you'll have learned what the dynamics of that market are. You might have tested out a rough concept or a rough proposition, and then you'll fine tune it. And to be able to fine tune it in the right direction, that's where you would use exploratory research to understand, what the dimensions are and just work it out into a sort of a rough product. Then you will need to test it again once it's more finalized before it goes to market, because you might have misinterpreted when you put your rough idea together exactly what it should look like. And that's the same for a service, a customer journey, a product, and all of those things require definition. and testing the definition.
So for me, a good marketing strategy is one that's then reviewed on an annual basis, possibly 6 monthly basis. And from what you're saying, if you're doing that strategy, then you should really be doing the research on an annual basis, or at least updating it. I'm guessing you don't have to go back, excuse me, and do a huge project every year, but you probably need to go back and review all of that research, maybe do some updates.
Yeah, I mean, it really depends on how fast the market is that you're in.
Mm-hmm.
So if it's FMCG and it's changing
Daily.
by season, or when something happens, something else is invented, and it changes, you need to review it. Yeah, that's right. When something becomes unfashionable and something else is in fashion, you need to work out whether you can save what you've got and redesign it, or whether you have to completely start again. But in terms of ongoing research, you don't need to research something, every month, because very few markets are changing that quickly. So in a slower market, you will maybe look annually to see what's changed, just to see whether the competitors changed, to see whether the buying habits have changed, whatever the market is, the usage has changed. Then also you need to look at the actual people that you're targeting, because our younger generations, they are completely different characters. We've got our Gen Zs, our Alpha generation. They've all got really different needs, because of all the technology and the communication that's coming through. People are going through dilemmas all the time. Fake news is coming out, so people are becoming more cynical.
We're not allowed to talk about Donald Trump, by the way.
Okay,
politics
fine,
not allowed.
Fine. No, I won't talk about it.
We could be here for years.
Yeah.
Okay.
But all of those things are making people think differently. So all these different generations, they're getting information at the push of a button. They've got screens in front of them that do everything. There's no delay now in getting communication, whether that's fake information or true information. So, I've done a lot of research with these different generations, and they're sort of saying, well, I have to check everything 10 times now before I believe it. The right source has to tell me that it is true before I believe it. So actually, where we have this much speedier communication network, people are actually now double and triple checking things just to make sure. Whereas we would, if somebody said something, if a bank said something or whatever, you'd believe it because you trust that brand. That trust element is much harder to get amongst the younger generations. And the older generations are following on. Their habits are changing as well. So you've got to keep abreast of how everyone feels, thinks, and does things. Some of that you can get from desk research. There's research studies on all the different segments of the population.
So sorry to interrupt. I was about to say we're talking about research.
Yeah.
You've just mentioned desk research.
Yeah.
Presumably, well, I know, but explain a bit more about the different types of research that you would typically use for this type for a project.
How long have we got? Right. Yeah. Okay. Right. So research divides into primary desk research, which is existing published research. Now, obviously, that's a very basic definition. You can go out and interview experts and get sort of information that's in the public domain. Primary research is where you go out and do a piece of research which is bespoke for what to answer your objective. Now, primary research is divided into qualitative research, which is in-depth research with smaller samples, but much more defined smaller samples, but in-depth, flexible questioning. So you can
focus groups,
depth interviews, paired depths, triads. There's lots of formats that you could use, but it's literally doing what we're doing. Although today, obviously, we also have the virtual version with Teams, Zoom, Google. But it's all to do with being able to interrogate people and get as much detail back as you want. Quantitative research is all about numbers. Now, that can be, again, any format. Traditionally, you might have had postal surveys, telephone surveys. Now, obviously, there's much more online. We have big global panels of people who are answering surveys a lot, and you can specify who you want to talk to, and then we can go out and find a few hundred or however many of those people in the defined segment, and ask them a limited number of questions, which they will respond. They're either going to be very closed questions, which have a few options, or they may be asked a bit more of an open question. But that will provide us some level of depth, but it'll answer some hypotheses that people have, but it gives us robust numbers. And then there's continuous research, which is monitoring things in the longer term. So you may go and talk to people quarterly. You may talk to the same people or different people, just to understand trends, to see how things are moving. So that's a potted thing. There's all sorts of other things like research communities you can set up and things like that. But you've got a whole toolkit of research tools, depending on what your question is and the audience that you want to attract. There'll be a tool that will actually cost effectively and effectively answer those questions.
Very good. I'm amazed you got it in such a short
Well,
so I can imagine anybody watching this is, especially smaller business owners are going, this is fantastic. Hopefully they'll find it useful. It's out of my price range. Now, I would always sit here and go, it's not out of your price range because you can't afford to be without it. And that it's an investment, it's not a cost. But I know it's probably how long's a piece of string, but can you give us a rough idea? Are we talking tens of thousands of pounds, or could a smaller business, if they've got £1,000 budget, for example, for research, could they get some valuable information with that amount of money?
Yeah. I mean, we've worked with anyone from someone who's found a product they want to launch, a total startup who's funding it completely themselves, through to an individual retail outlet, through to a massive corporation. Obviously, that can vary from £1,000 to £500,000, depending on the amount of work and the costs involved with it. But, a small business that has some questions and they don't really know how to go about it. I mean, a lot of people will do DIY research, will get 50% of the answers they need, but it's much harder when they don't really know how to ask the questions without loading them. They don't know how to interpret the findings in depth. They'll get a basic knowledge of what information has come out. And I'm not being patronising, but that's what happened in the pandemic. And people just didn't go out to do proper research. They just thought, we'll do it ourselves. We use various SurveyMonkey and things like that. We'll ask a few people some questions, and that's our market research done. Obviously the thing is to try and put it into some sort of scientific structure where, if it's a piece of desk research, make sure you hit all the different sources so that you're not just saying, well, I found a report on this. Well, is it a true report? Is it fake news? Let's find 3 or 4 sources. So even a piece of desk research needs to be done thoroughly. Interviewing, fine. Yeah, you can just interview people but it needs to be done in a structured way, and it needs to be done the same with each of the people you talk to if you're going to compare the results. You can't have a little chat with 5 people and say, I've done some qualitative research, because you might have asked the questions differently. You learned something in the first one, and it said, oh, someone told me this. And then, do you think that as well? Well, that's not a way of asking an open question. So it's all about consistency, designing something which can be interpreted, and then looking at the findings in a way that helps the business to answer that business question or move forward.
Okay. So I guess the last point for this discussion, and there may well be many that we need to have, that I'm more and more passionate as the years go on about social responsibility, corporate social responsibility, as the original definition was. It's now, people refer to it as ESG, although they are different things, and sustainability as it is now. And increasingly, sustainability, social responsibility is becoming a part of a business strategy. And as such, as a marketing department, we are having to include it within our messaging, our content, our plans. can research be used to help a business formulate their sustainability strategy, and to, I guess, formulate the messaging on the back of it?
Yeah, I mean, you said a few interesting things there. A few companies are having to build sustainability in our. It feels like they're being forced to in some ways. So I think the first thing is getting the total buy-in of the decision makers in the company. No, we're not just doing this because we have to or because everyone else is doing it. It's actually understanding why you're doing it. So for a start, research can be used just to understand what you want to get out of it. What's the objective of doing this? Is it because everyone else is doing it? Is it because the law says we have to do it? Is it going to improve our brand image? You know, why do we want to do it? And what result then looks good? You know, is it more people considering us? Is it more people buying us? Is it the fact that we know we're doing it properly and, you know, we feel better? Now, I think it's really important that you talk to the customers who buy your brand to find, or service, to find out how sustainable they think you are for a start, you know, to benchmark where the company is at the moment. So I think that's a really important thing before you start, because you might do a few things and think, well, we've added this policy and this policy, and we're buying this way, we're sustainable. And customers might say, well, you know, I think they're doing it because they want to be seen to be sustainable, but they'll be cynical about it.
Greenwashing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Whereas if you've talked to people and they say, well, I don't believe they really want to do it, then the important task is convincing the public of the reason why you're doing it. Not just doing a few things, but actually creating a mission statement or some sort of a proposition. I mean, we work for some very large German tech companies and very large-scale automotive companies, looking at their mission statements to see who believed what they were saying, what the mission statement actually meant in terms of what they needed to do. You know, creating sustainability universities and things like that, which are branded in the brand name of the companies, through to, you know, somebody who's just suddenly buying their office equipment slightly differently, and putting a huge banner on the website saying, you know, we are now totally green. So I think, you know, you need to understand why you're doing it. So you need to benchmark first. You then need to decide what you're going to say about yourself. So what position are we going to have? Then you need to actually work out what things you're going to do to actually fit that proposition. But you don't only need to ask the customers, because in a lot of organizations, one of the most valuable assets is the staff. Ask the staff what they feel. You know, how green do you think we are? How, you know, does the management believe that we need to do this? Is it communicated through regularly? What vocabulary are they using? Is it the right vocabulary? Do you believe in it because of what they're saying? So if you haven't convinced the staff that it's something that you really want to do, it's going to be very hard to convince the general public.
But sorry to interrupt. You know, 2 points that kind of merge into one. So I gave 3 different terms: ESG, CSR, and sustainability. If you're talking to a team internally, and that could be a team of 5 or 5,000, the chances are there's going to be different understandings of what those terms mean. So you need to clarify that. The other part for me, which really will formulate whether a company is truly sustainable and truly socially responsible, is the complete engagement of every single member of staff. Because you've only got to get one member of staff that's not involved and engaged, and it makes the proposition much weaker. If you get to a larger business where you've got the senior stakeholders, maybe the sponsor of, you know, who's a C-level sponsor, who's not really engaged. Yeah, there's nothing worse than a CEO who goes, yes, we're sustainable, couldn't give 2 hoots, because as far as he's concerned, it's a cost to the business. So that to me is where the internal research is probably the first thing you would ever do. Forget the competitors, forget the marketplace. What do your staff think? And there's a lot of research out there and stats that are saying that, you know, now it's 60+% of employees want to work for a business that's socially responsible, want to have that sustainable outlook. So it's fundamental as a tool to engage with them.
But don't only interview your staff, interview the senior management, because as you said, you know, there might be one that doesn't believe in it, the others might be all for it, but, you know, if the CEO or the CFO is sort of sitting there saying, why are we doing this, you know, and just digging away trying to put other people off, it just creates a sort of an undercurrent of negativity. Whereas if everybody is actually on the same wavelength and saying the same thing, it's much more believable. You know, I mean, this topic's quite interesting. Was 15, 20 years ago, we'd have been researching organic products, let's say. And everybody said, fantastic, what a great principle, I'm really interested in it, I want to do it. Then they noticed they were 20 or 30% more expensive. Well, I'm not quite ready for it yet. When they come down in price, I'll do it. There's a similar thing going on with sustainability and business in general. You know, I've done lots of business-to-business interviews with people, and, you know, if we might be working for a supplier and talking to their business customers, and we're saying, you know, how important is this? Well, if it makes the price different, I'll still buy the one that I normally buy. As long as the product quality is there, I'm afraid sustainability is not quite ready for me, especially with the recession on and this, that, and the other. So it's balancing out what effect it's going to have on your image. But I don't think it's only the brand image. It's also the way the company feels and the way the ethics the company wants to operate on. So there's a mix of things going on. So that's why it's really important to interview all the audiences. And you mentioned stakeholders as well. You know, there's going to be other people who are touching the brand, the suppliers, etc. Might not want to work with you because you're not sustainable.
Absolutely.
You know?
And it's, I guess I think we could talk about this for hours. Well, I certainly could. But, you know, to wrap it up, in terms of CSR and sustainability, legislation is coming into force, and in the UK it's 2030. In Europe it's already there, and if you're in the supply chain for a large European business, within the next 12 months you're going to have to start reporting on your social responsibility. And carbon reporting is going to come into play. So this is now, it's not a nice to have anymore. It's a must have. And you can wait till 3 months before the legislation comes into force, and then the cost to change a business is going to be astronomical. Or you can start looking at it now, and that process has to start with doing research.
Absolutely. And in fact, some businesses that I'm interviewing are already being told to show their credentials. So if they're tendering for public sector or any EU business, it never mind the deadline. I mean, they're already being told, you know, we won't consider you unless you've got it. So
and if you're looking for investment and you're looking for VC funds to come in, if you haven't got that reporting, forget it. They are all now very much focused. Listen, Neil, that's great.
Thank you.
I suspect we might be coming back for round 2 at some point, but thank you. Your time's much appreciated.
No problem.